Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Terry Young, CEO and founder at Sparks and Honey, an agency focused primarily on the future. Terry has been managing director at Rapp, a consultant at McKinsey, and senior vice president of strategy at Targetbase. Terry focuses on linking the future to the present. Welcome here, Terry.
Hey, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
So your agency does a lot of stuff dealing with kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I started the agency about 6 years ago, and we're part of Omnicom. And the whole premise from the very beginning, when we wrote the original business plan, was how do we build a system that allows us to understand what makes humans tick? How do we use the data that is in the world, from social listening data to primary research to secondary research, and put our finger on the pulse of why people do what they do. And that's basically the system that we've created. And we use it to help us understand why people are making decisions that are going to happen in the next, couple of months and then the next 5+ years. So it is a system that allows us to basically futurecast.
So is that a technology system?
Yeah, it is. We call our platform Q, and Q is a combination of a couple of different things. So, sometimes when I say platform, people say, "Oh, is it something that I can log into and I push a button and it gives me the answer?" It's much more complicated than that. In that we're aggregating a lot of different pieces together. So we use about 26 different platforms that scour the web and look at tweets and Facebook and blogs, and it looks at semiotic analysis and patent analysis and deal flow and all those kind of things. That's one piece of the model. A second piece of the model of the system that we've created is a language to categorize culture. So culture is chaotic, culture is messy, culture is hard to understand because it operates in different altitudes. It operates in things that are very long term and things that are very short term. And so we've created a language that we call our elements of culture that basically allow us to cluster and categorize what we see happening in culture. Once we've clustered and categorized it, the platform then scores it automatically. So we're using an algorithm to basically score on energy, how big something is in the here and now, prediction, how long something's going to last, and reach, how many people it's going to impact. So you have the combination of these tools that we're using, our categorization system. Then we have our human network, which is people around the world that are basically doing trend watching that feed their insights directly into the platform. And the platform is an active learning system in that it's getting smarter as those insights are fed in. And then the last component is every single day we come together as an entire company and we unpack those signals in real time. And that's an important part of the system because sometimes it's hard to pick up on the nuance of a pattern or something that is shifting in the world. And when you do it daily, the team is building muscle memory, just like if you're a runner. And that muscle memory allows you to weave together things at the horizontal and discover little patterns that you may have missed. So when we talk about platform and we talk about Q, it's the combination of all of those different elements under one platform.
So can you give me an example or two of what this looks like? Anything you've identified?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could rattle off so many different things. So, we just put out our 2018 predictions about a week ago. Every year we look at the 100 signals or trends that we think are going to impact organizations in the next year. And, I'll just rewind for you because it's always easier to talk about something that has unfolded over time. Probably, I'm guessing 4.5 years ago, we started observing behavior online of people watching other people play video games, right? And this was early on in the esports development. Probably, when we see signals like that, we're like, oh, this is a really interesting behavior. We don't dismiss anything. We then begin to do social listening around it. We begin to understand what people are talking about, what language they're using, the behaviors they use in these online environments, the technologies that they use. And in beginning to do that, we saw that there was a really interesting micro tribe that had formed around watching other people play video games. It wasn't too long after that Twitch came onto the scenes, and then it wasn't a year after that, Twitch was bought for I think $1 billion, and since then, you've seen the explosion of what's happened around esports. So that is kind of a kind of example. We really focus on making change visible, meaning that we want to discover things that are changing when it's very early on, and then we want to monitor that change over time. So with a Fortune 500 company, we may be seeing the change, notifying them of that change, and then watching it together till it reaches a certain threshold or a point where you'd want to action on it or do something with it.
So what do you do with that? Like you get that information early. You go to a company and you say, "Hey, this is happening," and they say, "Well, I don't see that."
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you think about exponentials, I mean, many companies can't see the change that's happening right in front of them, right? And if you think about that, it's we have this one slide that we talk with clients when we talk about exponentials, and we say, you think about a penny doubling every day for 30 days, and if someone said, hey, I'll give you $1 million today, or I'll give you a penny that doubles every day for 30 days, most people would be like, give me the $1 million. But if you if you do the math, about, I don't know, day 27, 28, you're at break even, and by day 30, you're at $5.4 million, right? And it's what happens in those last 3 days is the huge exponential effect. And that's, I think, inspirations to guided by the way they've done things and dismiss things that are really small signals. But that's kind of the beauty of the system, in that the system identifies those changes and then says, let's continue to monitor the changes until the point at which it hits a threshold that you will actually action on it. You'll do something with it. And those actions come in the form sometimes of, a modification of the way you think about communications from, a campaign that you put into the marketplace. It could come in the form of a new product that you design. It could come in the form of a new ingredient that you add into a product. It could come in the form of a way that you think about selling or a business model that is constructed. So we work with companies across all those different areas, but always from that same model of observing culture and understanding the little subtle changes that are starting to percolate in culture.
So does typically, say a retailer hypothetically come to you and say, keep us apprised of changes in clothing desires, or do you discover one and then go to retail and say, hey, we see this thing coming?
We mostly do the former, where we are on contract with companies, and because culture is wide and broad and big, and you need to calibrate the tools for precision, right? And anytime you're running the system, there will be things that come up that could be really interesting for lots of different organizations. But just because you observe something, you have to have a mechanism by which to turn that into an action within the organization. So it works best when we are in a contract with a large company, to take a luxury manufacturer, and we're monitoring in real time what's happening with retail shifts, what's happening with color shifts, material innovation, so forth and so on. And then as we see those things arise, we have a mechanism by which we can activate them within the organization.
So do you see trends dealing with technology, like that more people are starting to use virtual reality, or they're moving to immersive headsets or things like that?
And we talk about it all the time. So I was telling you before about the briefings that we do. So every single day we have a team of 80 or so people that come together, 20 at the table that are dissecting trends in real time. I think I was in the briefing for maybe 30 minutes today, and we had 2 or 3 signals on VR and AR, and one individual in the meeting made a really interesting connection. He was like, I've been thinking a lot lately about the idea of virtual reality being a solo activity, and augmented reality and AR allowing groups to come together and interact in real time. And in a world where digital creates a greater divide between human connection and where we're living in a world that where loneliness is becoming, a disease that we have to deal with. This idea of how technology and different types of applications of technology play in bringing communities together versus isolating people in more detail. And that was an example of a conversation that we had just a few hours ago when we were looking at those technologies.
So, how do your cultural shifts, identifications, link up with, say, technological change, like units of devices that are going to be shipped? How does that match up with your cultural shift? Are you typically ahead of them or behind them?
When you say units that are going to be shifted, you're saying like the amount of units or the kind of features?
Well, both. Because we see regular research on like IDC stuff that says the wearables shipped next year will be this, VR headsets will be this, AR headsets will be this. I'm guessing that you identify ahead of time kind of the cultural shift that requires the shipments of that number of devices.
Yeah, so when we look at the shifts and when you think of the taxonomy that we've created that's called the elements of culture, and there's probably about, I don't know, 200 or so trends in that trend set right now. We are taking in thousands and thousands of small little signals every day. Those signals come into our computing environment and they're scored in real time. And then once they're scored, they're clustered into that taxonomy. So basically, for any of those kind of questions, we would go back in. So, Samsung, Apple, HP, any client could come to us and ask us which trends are impacting a certain sector or segment at a given time. How does Gen Z view certain types of features or functionality? And then you can project out or create a projection around the impact of that cultural trend on demand, right? And so we do that kind of work when we basically take the cultural trends and then we're looking at kind of two methodologies. One is the idea of pink spaces. So these are territories that a brand may not be playing in today, but they should. So that could be a new feature that you need to move into because it's not on your radar. Or pink icebergs that if you move into a particular territory, this could be something that could be problematic for you. So it could create a ripple effect. And then based on those, we then want to wrap sizing and projections around them. So that would drive, whether that's the number of units you create or that drives where you sell things or the segment you sell them to. It drives those type of metrics.
So does your model include essentially data as well as these other kinds of things you're talking about? For example, does it have the number of VR headsets that are already in the marketplace? Is that sort of a data point?
Yes. So, I mean, basically, when you think about what we're doing in Q, as I was saying before, we're pulling in any kind of open in the market data set that you could look at. So, if there's something that's publicly available, we're pulling in any kind of social data, meaning so that we could look at image analysis and language analysis and how consumers are talking about things or how they're sharing things or so forth and so on. We're pulling in anything from the media and influencers. We're many times going and conducting our own analysis in market, doing primary research, could be anthropological research or ethnographic research. And then we overlay different data sets. So, for example, you can go into Bloomberg and the Bloomberg terminal, and you can get many of the things that you're talking about. That would be the hard specific numbers on total number of units shipped, or total market penetration, or market share, or things that are coming directly from an analyst. All of that is combined together and analyzed as part of the Q system.
Oh, so you can see a cultural shift coming, but you could also simultaneously identify that it can't be mass market yet because there aren't enough people who have whatever is needed to do that thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you can say here is a particular trend. I'm just going to grab something. We talk about with millennials the concept of major minor stones and this idea of in a world that has less ownership and less traditional rites of passage and celebrations of it could be traditionally marriage and all these different things that we can take the mundane and turn it into a celebration, right? And that concept of major minor stone, you can then look at a particular trend and say, well, what is the impact of that trend in culture? How big is the trend? How many people is it impacting? And then you would go in and you would do the overlay of the particular brand or company that you're talking about specifically. So say it's McDonald's, and you're going to go in and do an overlay of how important this particular trend is to that brand, and then what the actions would be. So it's kind of cut at the horizontal cultural level, at the category level, and then at the brand level.
So I know you've got a lot of international experience in your background. Are you seeing global trends in this? Are you just doing it domestically in the U.S.?
We do it on a global basis. So a lot of the clients we work with have a global footprint. What I would say is that many tech trends, many of the trends that are in our elements of culture, you see on a global basis at the most high abstract level. But when you talk about how they manifest in a particular region or the activation of them, there's a lot of nuance to it. And so it's very important to understand trend sets globally, but also understand the activation or implementation of what that means on a local basis. And we do a lot of cuts. And there are some trends that translate better than others. Like, one of the trends that in the US that is all across beauty right now is looking at genderless beauty, agender aesthetics, gender fluidity. That's a very important topic that is hovering in the beauty space. It bleeds over into the policy space and the political space. But that trend would not have the same resonance in all countries. And so you have to calibrate accordingly. The same thing is when we do, I'm just going to use beauty again, when we're doing beauty work, we clearly are going to watch trends coming out of South Korea and Japan as key origin areas for some of the latest things that are emerging. Brazil is another good place. And most areas that you focus in, there are either key locations or key influencers that tend to generate a lot of what you see that's new, that's emerging. And so you always want to hone in on that, but it differs by whatever category or type of trend that you're looking at.
So for a global brand, then I'm presuming that you could give them a kind of a global rollout strategy that start here, go there, go to Asia first, go to whatever second.
Yeah, I mean, basically with the analysis, I mean, we would go in and we would understand where the world is going. What changes are on the horizon, and we plot it by now, next, and future. So 1 year out, 3 years out, 5+ years out, and then what is the regional nuance by over time, and it does turn into a roadmap. And we're doing a project now where we're looking at the impact of market share decline on a particular brand in China, and how we understand what has driven that decline, and then how we rebuild the brand, right? And so you could do, and this particular brand is global in nature. What we might recommend may be very different in each of those different markets. There's going to be some connection points, but timing might be different, and also the nuance of the recommendation will be different.
So what are some of the cultural shifts you're seeing around IoT that are coming?
Yeah, so I mean, like there's so many things that we've been looking at. I mean, when we think of what's happening with in the home and automation and Alexa, I mean, one of the more interesting social things that I think is good, and we've looked at it with the future of parenting, is really looking at this concept of foster tech. And what does it mean when technology takes on the role of caregiver or parent? And as we embed sensors in every single thing in our homes, and we kind of give over some kind of authority to tech, what does it mean in the way that we interact with that tech, and the almost the soul that could be created as part of that tech? And I think it gets into a really interesting space, when you look at young kids interacting with technology in the home, the way it is rewiring them to think, the way it changes the language that they use, the way it changes the way they interact with other people and other technology. So that's one really interesting space of how technology, is shifting almost the modern family configuration. And I think about, many aspects of tech in the home and IoT being part of that modern family configuration that you don't even distinguish that much between them, right? That's one area that we talk about a lot. A second, clearly you brought up VR and AR before. I mean, we're doing a lot of analysis looking at tech drugs and the idea of how virtual reality can be used in order to enhance or change emotion. If you think about how we can use VR systems in order to increase empathy, which a lot of research has been done in that particular area. Second is how you can use it to manipulate certain feelings that would be similar to if you were using a drug, and so how that plays into healthcare, into wellness, into increasing focus. So those are some really interesting territories that we've been watching. Oh, go ahead.
So what do you do with that information?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. When we think about the future of parenting and home and how this modern family configuration fits in, we would work with companies who are either playing in the tech space and designing in-home experiences, or we may work with a brand, and we work with both of these, so I'll give you both examples, with a brand that's in the parenting space. And we would have, could be recommendations twofold. One, on new products that could be created. Two, on new business models that could be generated on ways that you could play in that evolved ecosystem. And number three, really just consumer understanding that allows you to communicate about this in a more relevant way. So it kind of unfolds in all three of those different areas.
So what does your expertise engine say about things like voice assistants in the home?
In what regard?
Where do they go? What does your system say they're going? Alexa, Google Home, those kinds of things.
I think they're in their infancy, and impact that you have over voice controlled interaction is just going to continue to expand. It's going to be able to control every aspect of the home, but I think it will also control it with very little friction. Like many of the things it's going to do on our behalf without us even needing to interact with it. It gets to a point where it anticipates what you would want. It almost, we have this something we were debating the other day about the morality that could be built into tech, into IoT or voice activation, and can we build moral interactions that help us be better people? And so I think this evolution is going to be even more entrenched in the way we interact. I think that it'll do many things that we currently do for ourselves, but it will do it without any interaction from us, which is, on one side, could be a little scary. On the other side, I think is going to free us up to do different kinds of things. It was a guy the other day said he has a Gen Zer who's thinking about going to college, and his son basically said, I don't see any reason to go to college because everything that I need an answer to, I can get that from asking Siri or Alexa. So what's the use? And I think that mentality of, we now have become cyborgs. We have completely augmented ourselves, and it's happening in the background is the reality that we're moving into. And that opens up a world of challenges and also adds a huge world of opportunity.
So I'm curious, in your system, does the system actually determine what you just said, or does it give you the knowledge or the insight for you to conclude that?
It gives us the points to triangulate and synthesize to those conclusions. So it is definitely a human and machine system in that It is using big data and thick data. It's using a triangulation of lots of different platforms. It's using a series of algorithms for pattern recognition. But the last mile is it's almost like if you take the world and you are quantifying it and then you're reducing it down to a cone of possibilities. It's that cone of possibilities where the human synthesis happens. And at that last piece, we're wrapping around that, the synthesis based on that triangulation.
Does your system ever basically tell you something that you just say, I don't buy that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see all kinds of anomalies in the data. I think the beauty of it is that you triangulate it, right? I mean, because the system is messy too, but there's this is the funny thing. Sometimes there are things that the system creates that you do some due diligence on it, and you're like, yes, that it just doesn't make sense, and there's an anomaly here. And then sometimes it doesn't make sense, and you do some due diligence on it, and you're surprised that maybe it made more sense than you thought. And so I'll give you an example of that. We curate into the system, and when we do our cultural briefing every day, we're looking at those signals in real time. We also have persona bots, and these bots look like people out in the world, and they've been modeled to replicate exactly the kind of signals that a group of individuals would be looking at. So it pushes the signals directly in. We do that because in a system you need to add bias. If you don't add bias in, you're going to have biases that you don't want. And so when you add those biases in, you get a wide range of random things that you would have never considered to be important. And when those things show up in the briefing, it catches people off guard, right? Because we know what persona it came from, what area of the world, what region of the US, so forth and so on, in what language. And those things can surprise you, but sometimes they can make you zig or zag and take you in a completely different place. And so that's kind of the beauty of the system. It's that discovery that's built in.
So where do you see the future of driverless cars? What is your system saying? Will people buy a driverless car?
Well, I would. So I'll start there and say I definitely would. I think it's just a matter of time. I say this in a funny way. My dad has been in the car business all of his life, and I went to about 5 or 6 years ago to Singularity University, and while I was there, I rode in the Google driverless car, and I remember coming back and telling him about the car, and he was like, "Oh, that's crazy. No one's ever going to go in a driverless car." I was like, "Yeah, but they're going to be safer and blah blah blah." And it's taken time, and now that's basically all he talks about. And it's been 5 years. And we deal with some of the large auto manufacturers. I think everyone is going there, and I think it is just a matter of time before autonomous vehicles are far safer than putting your teenager out on the road on Friday night, and everyone will move to them.
No, I mean, technologically, no question that the technology will be there. I'm asking because you really deal with cultural shifts, and my guess is it's not going to be the technology that's the stumbling block. It's going to be the cultural shift.
Yeah, but I think that we're going to get past that. I mean, I think you're going to see over the next 5 years just the amount of electric and autonomous vehicles that's going to come from every major auto manufacturer. And I think the barriers, I think people say, oh, the barriers to electric and autonomous is that people don't want them. I think the barriers has been more the price point and the distance and the tech. And I think when those three things catch up, and they're going to catch up very rapidly, and the prices come down, it won't be a trade-off. I mean, people will prefer having the autonomous vehicle.
So lastly, what do you expect for the next year? The big things.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing a lot of research around is everything that's happening with space satellites, and I think it's a fascinating territory to watch. I mean, there's I think 1,200 lower orbit commercial satellites in space today, and there's going to be, over the next 5 years, another 5,000 that will be put into lower orbit. And those space satellites are going to reconstitute and change the way we think about data. I mean, you're talking about IoT data and you're talking about virtual reality. This is now data that gives us a vantage point of seeing the Earth in a completely different way. Whether I'm watching shopper traffic patterns, farm patterns, migration patterns, whatever it is, I now have access to data that had never been available. And when that data becomes comprehensive and people begin to use it, Planet is a really good example of the people producing that kind of data. I think that is a really interesting space to be focusing on, because I think our focus up to this point when it comes to big data and data sources is all locked on Earth. And when we take that out of the Earth and we see Earth as one planet, and we can look at it holistically, I think it's going to uncover many different discoveries. And I think next year, probably probably between the next 1 to 5 years, is when all the innovation is going to happen around that territory.
Wow, that's a big idea. Thank you, Terry Young, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck.